to always have something oriented toward growth and growing either your business or your career, depending on where you're at. I'm super happy because everybody up here has multiple careers or businesses. So it's like 4 for the price, or 12 for the price of 4, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start out and have you just give a brief introduction of yourselves and the multiple endeavors that you pursue. And then we'll get into more conversation. And actually, this conversation has come up organically throughout the day about multiple revenue streams and managing multiple efforts. So I'm looking forward to a good conversation. Thanks. Yep.
Hi, I'm Bao Phi, Program Director at the Loft Literary Center and a spoken word artist. And I was born in Vietnam, but basically raised in the Phillips neighborhood of South Minneapolis my entire life. And now I'm a program director at the Loft, but I started there 14 years ago as a receptionist. And whenever I talk about, so I guess the quick version is, I work at a literary arts nonprofit as an arts administrator, and I also manage my own spoken word career. And I've been a national touring artist since about 2000. I had my start at the South High Speech Team in about 1991 or 92. I did creative expression, which lets you write your own poetry and perform it, and that's what I did. That's how I started way back when. And it's always funny to talk about career and growth because back when I started, I had no plan or path. To say that you would be a poet, you might as well say you wanted to be a Hollywood star. Like that's how inaccessible it was to me. Like my worldview back then was I was working at Cub Foods, pushing carts, and then got promoted to bakery. And I was like, if I can just make it into the meat department, like, you know what I mean? Like those guys get time and a half. They're full union. Like they were the kings of Cub Foods. And seriously, everybody wanted to be in the meat department. And that was my worldview back then. Before I knew like you could get paid like money to go to college and have this thing called career. I knew I loved poetry and art, but I didn't think that there was something. I knew I loved it, but I didn't say to myself, I'm gonna be on Def Poetry Jam someday, because it didn't exist. And I didn't say I want to be in 10 years a paid spoken word artist, because to my mind that didn't exist. I just did it because I loved it. I guess I'll just.
Yeah, that's all very well said, because that in many ways mirrors my own experience. My name's Andy Sturdivant. I guess, boy, if I had business cards with me, which I don't, they would probably say artist/writer/arts administrator. That's kind of the holy trinity of the 3 things that I do. In terms of how that manifests itself, I am the Artist Resources Director at Springboard for the Arts in Lowertown, St. Paul. I write a weekly column for MinPost. I'm an author. My first book just came out this month. Thank you. And I have some sort of artistic practice on top of that too, where I'll exhibit or do public programming. And all those things relate to each other in some ways, and in other ways they relate to each other less. And yeah, I think when I was, in middle school or in high school or whenever it is, you begin seriously thinking about what your future career is going to look like. I don't think that I had an idea that I was going to be doing all these different things. I guess I assumed that I would be one thing, and that would be the thing that I was. Like I would get up in the morning and I'd say, well, I'm an author, and that's what I do, and then, go to the author shop or whatever and do whatever it is authors do for 8 hours, and then, come home to my family and cook dinner, and then, watch Cheers and go to bed. That's obviously not quite the way my day is organized. I do watch Cheers before I go to bed every night, of course, because they have it streaming on Netflix, and it's all 11 seasons. But but aside from that, I think that when I was younger, it was hard to conceive of having a career that had a lot of different facets to it. And so, in some respects, I feel like I've very much made it up as I've gone along. So I guess that's what we'll talk about.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Semhar. I have many hats, and I just want to say, just listening to Bao and Andy, I've spent most of my life trying to pick which hat to share with which person, and I'm really excited that I can sit here and give you my whole list of hats. So it's fantastic. I'm a lawyer by training. I worked on international affairs and U.S.-Africa foreign policy, and on the side, I'm an organizer. So I've founded a number of groups, civic, youth, nonprofits, And I'm now the head of the Diaspora African Women's Network, which is a membership-based women's leadership organization focusing on the contributions of African diaspora women towards Africa. Now, that one is my life, and that's the one that isn't paid. But I feel rich, you know? So in addition, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I'm a consultant. And so I don't know what day or what hour you talk to me. Somehow dawn comes out of my mouth all day, but I manage to, you know, blend them all in. And I think that's what's so exciting about this conversation is, you know, to Andy's point and Bao's point, growing up, I kept thinking, what's the one thing I'm going to be? But everything about me was infinite and multiple and diverse, and it just had so much growing up, and I grew up here, that I needed to find a way to practice whatever it is I do in multiple ways. And so I guess I'm really happy that I can be here with that kind of title, the multiple titles. Yeah.
I have my own. All right. I'm Michael Anchel. Unlike Bao and I went to high school together, so this is kind of fun. We haven't seen each other in years. But when I was 14, 15, I knew exactly what I was going to be, you know, and this is exactly what I've become, which is, oh, that's bullshit. I think if I'd met myself, I think if my 14-year-old me were to meet me today, my purple-haired anarchist lumberjack, leather jacket, uptown, stoner, you know, everything, sports coat, necktie, what? So I think it's an evolution. It's kind of fun. And the list of things that I do, I own a design build firm called Otagawa Anchel. We are a residential green design and construction firm, and if you guys ever heard of the restaurant Travail, we designed and are building their new restaurant right now, which is kind of exciting. I led the development of a program called Minnesota Green Star, which is our state's green building program, which is now expanded into the 5-state area, which is quite exciting. I own a consulting firm called Verified Green, and we fly around the country training and teaching architects and designers and builders how to build green and design green, and we work with codes officials and local units of government on developing policy. We helped St. Paul write their sustainable building policy, and we helped Minneapolis rewrite their lawn ordinance so that now you can have natural prairie grass style yards, which was very exciting. Yeah. I bought a hot dog at a carnival once, and the guy said, "Oh, you're the grass man." I was like, and you know, in addition to that, I write for Hanley Wood Media. I have a column that comes out in Remodeling Magazine, which is a national publication, and I write for a variety of other magazines and have been published in a number of books and all of that fun stuff, which is a long way of saying I've pursued everything that's come across my path that's been exciting and interesting, and everything has been designed to allow me to do that. And that's probably where we're going to end up talking about most, is how that happens. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think this is actually a panel that's been a long time coming for Giant Steps, because I think that almost all of you also have multiple things going on, and we haven't ever really explicitly talked about that. So I'm really happy to have you here, and where you're all, I think in other places you might hear about the serial version of this, but I mean, all of you are doing things concurrently, as are most of the rest of us here. So the first question is around, as you're doing things concurrently, we heard in the last plenary about excellence. So how do you manage, or how do you ensure, or is it an advantage or a disadvantage that you have concurrent things going on at the same time in terms of the level of excellence that you can deliver?
Well, I'll go first.
I was going to say.
Look at that. I think that's cue number one, is you manage your expectations. You know, with every space that you're in, you give the vision of what you see in the work and the project or the assignment or whatever it is that you have at hand. And you project the vision, but you also manage the expectations of the people you're working with, your expectations, and also being fully aware of like your human side, your health, your well-being, your one person. And that, I think, is a constant conversation with yourself and with whoever you're working with about expectations, you know, and getting to an excellence, a point of excellence.
So maybe I'll make it more specific. Can one of you speak about a specific example where you felt like you actually struggled to keep things all moving forward, or forward in the way that you'd want them to, and sort of what happened and what came out of that?
I'll bite.
Thank you.
So I think I'm going to answer it this way. I think if I wasn't doing all the things that I was doing, if I wasn't running all these things concurrently, I wouldn't be able to do the things that I want to do. So you build an organization to support the lifestyle that you want to lead, right? And it could be your passion at the time, but then you build the infrastructure so that it runs, and you build the systems and all the culture, and it does its thing, and then that gives you the freedom to pursue the next thing. And when that thing is stabilized, then it frees you to go and pursue the next thing. I would say that the business side and pursuing all of my interests and activities and building programs has been the easy part. I would say that the excellence part is when you try to make sure that you're balancing all of your pursuits with your passions and your work, with family. You know, I've gone through a couple of marriages, and that would be an example of not doing well at everything at once.
We're not here to judge. But I appreciate your honesty. I mean, I think anybody else have any other things of where they've sort of had to learn a different approach or come up with a different way of looking at things?
Sure. I mean, I think you learn through experience what you're capable of and what good projects are for you. And, you know, if you had asked me 12 years ago, hey, Bao, I'm going to do this militant Asian American puppet show, and I need you to be in rehearsals 5 days a week after work, I probably would have said yes. You know, but like now, no way, because I have a kid, I have a job, I have my own career that I have to manage, and I have to juggle all of this. And I think part of being an artist that does all of this is you're able to kind of get a sense of what your capabilities are, like knowing your boundaries, knowing not just what's good for you, but knowing what's good for the person asking you to do something.
I mean, but this goes back, the source of the question is, those of us with multiple hats, you get stretched, you wear yourself out, you all hit burnout at some point, and everyone has their burnout story. And I think the takeaway from that is, okay, you're a creative and you're skilled at multiple endeavors, but then you have to know how to measure your strengths and how to protect yourself from burning out again. And sometimes things come at you at such speed and ferocity that you have no choice. And they say that sometimes the greatest driver of excellence is just being really busy and really under the pressure. And I tweeted like last week, I was like, look, this coal is about to turn into a diamond because I am so stressed. But it's because of all of the hats and deadlines that I'm under. The good thing is, if you love what you do, you embrace those deadlines, and you know, the driver here for me has just been I do what I believe in. I have a mission-oriented approach to what I'm doing. My goal isn't profit or visibility or, you know, fame. It's impact and the ripples that it's going to send through the community. And so I work literally 14 hours and I won't notice. And that's not healthy because there's other parts of our lives, right? But it helps you reach a point of excellence that you couldn't have imagined.
Yeah, and making all those things work together is a really important thing. I always feel a little, I don't know, squishy when I talk to somebody and they ask, what do I do? And I say, well, I'm an artist and a writer and arts administrator. And so I can imagine them thinking, okay, well, that means he's a decent writer, a mediocre artist, and a bad arts administrator. Or you can shuffle those around any way you want. And honestly, I don't know. I mean, there's some days where I think there may be something to that. Like maybe, you know, maybe if I was focusing more narrowly on certain aspects, you know, they'd be more successful. But at the same time, each of those three things inform each other in a really important way. I mean, a lot of the work that I do as a writer could not happen if I was not thinking about a lot of the things that I have to think about in my role as an artist. A lot of the stuff that I do in my role as an arts administrator, you know, talking to artists, seeing what they're up to, helping them find resources. Those things inform the artistic practice. And so, I mean, yeah, it's like a juggling act, I guess. I mean, that's a huge, you know, cliche, I guess, but that is sort of how you can imagine it, just keeping all of those things going together, all three of those things, or four of those things, or however many, and making sure that they have some relationship to each other. I mean, I think if I told people that I was like, you know, a swim instructor, a barber, and like a horticulturist, like they'd say, oh boy, you know, that's a deeply confused man. But being an artist, a writer, an arts administrator, you know, those things feed into each other in some way. And I think being very intentional about thinking how those things relate to one another is a really important thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, first of all, I have nothing against militant Asian American puppet shows. But I totally agree. You know, one thing I was thinking of is back before I started as a receptionist at the Loft, I was working in a restaurant, and I feel like I was writing poems on these little short order tickets, and I felt like I had so much fire then because my work had nothing to do with my art, right? And now that my work, my day job that pays my bills has to do with my art, it can be very challenging because, you know, you've already spent, you know, 9 hours in an office doing this for somebody else. And then the challenge then becomes, how do you do it for yourself? But I think that there are strengths, like you're all saying, you find ways to support one can't exist without the other. So for example, you know, I curate and run a spoken word series called Equilibrium, and in running that, I understand now when someone books me to be a spoken word artist, get your contract in on time. You know, like get your press photo and bio in on time, for God's sake. You know, like, and I learn, you know, and I learn all of that because I'm on the other side of the desk organizing that. I understand the ins and outs of that, and I have a great deal of respect for anyone who brings me out and gives me an opportunity to read, because I know what it's like to work that hard to put something on. And so I agree with everybody. You find ways for everything to inform and feed off.
I'm just agreeing with you. I'm nodding like, yep.
Well, it's great because you kind of anticipated my question, because I mean, I also have multiple pursuits, and that's what I've found surprising is how they do feed each other. And it's exciting sometimes when you see connections that maybe, I probably sound like the person that you were describing when I talk about what I do, but it seems really disparate, but they actually come together, and for me, this actually is one of the unifiers of what I do. So that has been an interesting revelation for me, is to see how they can actually advance everything instead of taking away from each other.
Well, you wanted to, this is growth, right? We're talking about growth, and there's lots of kinds of growth, but you know, growth is the antithesis of death. Death is stagnation. It's a lack of change. It's an absence of change, right? And so growth means you're shifting and changing and moving. So when you meet someone who is so narrowly focused and myopic in their process and their beliefs and the job and right, and their bandwidth, you know, their understanding and their focus is so narrow, they have so little comprehension of everything else. And I think when you see people who are inspired by the things around them, and you're talking about this bleed through and this crossover, but that's exactly what inspires the growth in those other areas that may have you hopscotch from one concept to the next to the next. It's that influence and being open and receptive to it, rather than suggesting that shouldn't be part of what you're doing. So,
when people meet me, the two things happen. I'm very intense, and then I'm kind of flighty. I don't know how you can be both, but it's because you know how you can be both is because you're intentional about why you're here, and you're also fluid. And I think the reason I've become someone with multiple hats is because I spent a lot of my formative years in early professional really doing a lot of self-interrogation about my goals and my contributions and my purpose. And doing that self-interrogation while I was in grad school, while I was going for these jobs, mainstream jobs, and realizing, okay, if I do this traditional job right now, this is only for a limited time, so like these day jobs. But doing that self-interrogation at such an important period of life helped me set the stage so that I could manage and know when to say yes and when to say no. And I find that a lot of people look at multiple hats as you're non-committal, or you don't stay in one place long enough. No, this is a marathon. This mission is a marathon, and I'm going to go through whatever roads I have to go through to get there. And so most people don't see how they're woven together, how my different hats and my different experiences come together. But it's revealing itself now, like 14 years later.
So that's great. You're actually I'm going off book now, but you're reminding me of one of the conversations that started Giant Steps actually between Kwame and myself. Was we were talking about, like, you know, how do you answer the question, when are you going to get a real job? Yeah. And so how do you face, or how do you answer that question to folks who don't understand maybe what you're doing, or not that it really matters, but it kind of matters. We've had a couple sessions about how you talk about what you do.
I don't know. I feel like I might have mercilessly cut those people out of my life entirely.
That's a valid answer.
They're gone. That's a little glib, but I think that might actually be true now that I think about it. I don't know. I think that might speak to something I've been thinking about hearing everybody talk. I think the fact that you are, wearing a couple of different hats and have different areas of interest, it means that you can move between worlds in a pretty easy sort of way. I mean, I feel like I have a lot of friends, for example, that are artists and they have an artistic practice, but they might have some kind of a job in some of the sciences, and so they can move between those two worlds and speak those languages very easily. And that becomes the value, the value of being able to move between these different worlds and not have to justify yourself, but instead be sort of not an interpreter exactly, but somebody that can bridge communities or disciplines or whatever else in a way that a very narrowly focused person might not be able to.
Yeah, I walked up and registered, and they're like, "What's one word to describe you?" And I was like, "I don't know. You tell me." And he didn't know me from Adam, and he goes, "Fluid. Something about you just comes across as fluid." And I was like, maybe that's because I'm on the panel about multiple. but I'm beginning to really.
I don't think he knew that, though. Did he know you were on the panel?
I don't know. I don't know, but I'm realizing like there's an asset here of being fluid and amenable to different environments, but knowing your target and being able to work with different kinds of people. So I'm a change maker. I'm a creator. People don't understand what that means in monetary terms or in traditional terms, but I can show you what I've done. And I believe that you should work. My mission is to create the spaces I wish existed. And creating the spaces for the community that I'm a part of, that I come from, and with my story, and trying to find a way to put that in with the rest of the larger community. So that means I have to be fluid, and it doesn't make sense till you see it. Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for this one, guys. When I came back from living overseas and I was doing restoration work and handyman stuff and working in the field, I remember my grandmother saying, "So you're painting houses and buildings. So will you come to New York and paint my closet? What will that cost?" And in a very derogatory, negative, like, when are you going to do something real with your life? Are you just going to be a painter? That's what that particular ethnic group is supposed to do, because she was an immigrant and that's how she talked. Anyway. And I think that sometimes you build on that. Maybe you draw something from that. You defy it. Instantly I was like, okay, well, I need to move up, and we're not just going to be restoration. We're going to become remodelers, and we're not going to be remodelers. We're going to be design builders. And then we're not just going to do residential projects. We're going to do commercial projects. And then we're going to go out and change the world and make other people do it the way we think they should do it. But I think at a point you stop having to answer that question. It's very unusual for someone to ask that or to look for any kind of explanation for when are you going to get a real job. I think when you're pursuing the things that are exciting and you've put in the time and you've really grown something, then the questions are more like, so you don't actually work, do you? You just play. You just have a good time? And how do I do that? Because that's fun, right? And I think that's the shift that I would argue that most of us, we just enjoy what we do. Mm-hmm. It's a blast. We have a blast doing it.
Yeah, the only people I let ask me that question are my parents. And
they're usually the first ones to ask that question.
And really I'm a lost cause to them anyway, so it doesn't matter. Like, I come from a poor refugee family, and they're still in survival mode. And so when you tell them you work at something called a nonprofit, right? They're like, wait, what? So there's no profit? Like, do you get paid to do this, So it's, and with my parents, it's, my dad still says, it's not too late for me to go to school to be a nurse. And, he really wants me. But I think that with my parents and other people too, it's like everybody, you just got to do what you do. I mean, it's one of those things where we're doing what we do because we found something that we're passionate about and we love, and we're just doing it, and we're doing our best, and eventually people just get it, I guess, or they don't, and then.
I mean, one thing I've also learned, especially this year, is how comfortable I am with risk, and how it doesn't turn me off from the dream or the vision. Now, granted, I make huge sacrifices to kind of see the results that we've got, but it's worth it. And I'm very comfortable kind of stepping out into the unknown, whether that's financially, professionally, even just intellectually proposing something that I didn't even think about 2 seconds before. I was on the phone with a university this morning, another university. I was talking to this professor about, you guys should really implement this kind of program. I don't know where it came from, and it's because I'm comfortable with that risk element. So I know it's irritating for a lot of people to go, God, you guys talk like it's so easy. But it's important to recognize that the reason it's easy is because I've chosen to become friends with risk and become friends with failure and become friends with poverty and friends with family. You know, so all of these different pieces that are helping make it happen.
Good, and I do think, building on maybe what you said too, I think there is, we kind of, Kwame and I sort of are glib about this, sometimes talking about people who get it and people who don't, and a little bit what you were saying, Andy, too, about, but I do think that is actually transition to the next question, and then we'll get to questions from outside, moving into sort of tactical things. But I know for me, I think for us, that it is about spending less time answering those questions or around people who are asking those questions and trying to find the people who are helping you figure out how to get the next thing done, right? So the next question I'd like to ask, and you touched on it with the boundaries before, is what are some of the practical things that you've done or that you do now to be able to manage this multiple endeavors going on concurrently, like time management, relationships, as practical as you want to get, we'll take it.
This is the easy stuff.
Is it?
I think this is the part that's easy. This is so. I'll try it first.
No,
all right? All right. Okay.
I'm curious.
So when I decided that I wanted to do things, so I really like design. I have an art background, and I started this company as an excuse to get paid to do my art. Right? That's where we all start. But then you realize that you have a business and you have employees, and now you have a job, and your job is to take care of other people and their families and all the people that are depending on you for income, right? And that means that you are suddenly the bottleneck of the company, and you need to find a way to remove yourself as the obstacle so that this can grow and survive. And the only way that that's going to help happen, in my opinion, is if you have systems, process, and strong culture. So systems and culture are the two things that I identify, and then you work on building those things so that you can do the other things. And I think if you understand that at some point that this thing that you've created, this art that you're pursuing, is a business as well, and you have to monetize it, you have to make it sustainable, it has to be able to function without you being involved in every single decision, and that's where people usually struggle. And I have this thing called unique business syndrome, right? UBS. And almost everybody suffers from it. Your business isn't unique. You're not unique. You're not a snowflake. Get over it. Right? Service industry is a service industry is a service industry. There are basic operating. Guess what? Accounting is not special to your business. You can hire any accountant off the street, and they will do your books the right way, hopefully. Right? And not steal your money. So there are basic rules that you can follow, and if you can just step away from it for a second and say, yeah, it's bonded to me and it's emotional, maybe I shouldn't be the one running it. If I want to be the creative in my business, maybe I should hire someone to run the business side of the business so I can be the creative, if that's what you want to do. If you say, you know what, I've transitioned from being the creative, I'm tired, I can't come up with good poems or art or a design, I'm going to hire people who are still thriving and excited and they've got the fire, but I'm going to give them the structure, and I'm going to run the business side for them, and I'm going to help grow them. Now you're in a nurturing, mentoring role, but you're taking care of the operations. You got to pick what you're going to do, and you have to focus in on it so that you can build that platform that will sustain it. And that, again, in my opinion, is a set of systems and processes, and everything can be defined. And it can be defined as ambiguous. It can be defined as open. That's an acceptable definition, right? Jack Welch is a moron. You don't have to measure everything with some kind of formula.
Here. I'll second the Jack.
Yeah? People are important. People have feelings. Value it. Keep the flexibility within the organization for people to make decisions and be empowered and do all of that fun stuff. But you got to set a process and you got to follow it. And then you got to build the culture that supports it for the unknowns, for the things that you didn't anticipate it, so that when you're not there, that the people who are running it or doing it for you or making the creative decisions are going to make the creative decisions that are the right ones, because they understand the brand and the culture and the thing that you're invested in, that you built, and you trust that they're going to see it forward. And that is that really is regardless of what you're doing, right? In my opinion. So.
Yeah, I'd like to publicly apologize for suggesting that might not be the easy part, because after hearing that, I think you're absolutely right. Everything seems so clear now. It really does. Yeah, I mean, I guess my amateur hour version of that same thing is, just being kind of humorless about, time and calendars. Like if you have to get something done and you know that, with like my column, I have to take about 5 hours to write it every week, and that 5 hours has to happen at some point on the calendar. And if I skip it to, like watch Cheers or go hang out with my botanist friends, it's not going to get done. And I'm going to have to write my editor and say, sorry, I was just having too good a time this week to get the stuff done. I guess I'll just do it next week, right? That's fine. No, that's not fine. That's not how the world works. And I don't know. I mean, I think, in my youth, I was a little more careless with my time, a little less focused, I guess, on things. But yeah, wearing a lot of different hats will beat it into you pretty fast. That you have to be really pretty disciplined in the way, especially with time. Just making sure that there's enough time for everything. That includes family and friends and picnics out in the country or whatever else it is that you do. Just gotta account for all those things.
So I started this work with passion, and somewhere along the line, passion turned into purpose, and then my purpose had to become practical. So a lot of visionaries, creatives, people are just passionate, we stay there. And you end up overcommitting, you end up not delivering, you end up looking at the rest of your life and going, wait a minute, what's happening in the rest of my life? And with Dawn and this women's organization, we spend a lot of time talking to our members about finding out, doing that self-interrogation with yourself and understanding why you're giving what you're giving, right? Because especially a lot of women, we give. And you have to learn how to ask, what's in it for me? But in my world, it isn't what's in it for me, it's always what's in it for my mission. And that helps me determine how much I give and what I ask for. So, moving from passion to purpose and making it practical is really the hardest part. And then the systems, especially from the nonprofit world, because I think of community and public service and helping others, sometimes I stray away from systems. And that actually has been the most transformational growth on my part in the last 2 years is institutionalizing this dream and making it so that I don't have to be there. And finding out how many other people get it and who are willing to work. I've learned to delegate, I've learned to be accountable to others. I've asked for help a lot more than I ever did because I am wedded to this goal. I'm not wedded to the dream, right? I mean, the dream is there. So I have found that women's leadership, so much of this is about taking care of the woman as well and the person, which is really hard. And we talk about this, Susan.
We talk about this a lot.
We talk about it a lot, about the hours and endless hours devoted. And then, it's no one's fault but your own if you don't take care of yourself. And what everyone is getting from you, they're benefiting from it. And you feel good having contributed. But when you come home and it's, empty, or your finances are low, or everyone is going out and you have piles of paper and work waiting for you, that was you. And if and when something happens to your life that doesn't make you available, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And your job and responsibility is to take care of that like your baby, and raise it with a family, raise it in a community, ask people for help, make it clear what the goal is. And so,
Good,
yeah.
thanks. You wanna?
I'll give a very nuts and bolts answer. So within about a year, I got my first book published. I was still working a full-time job. I had a 2-year-old daughter with my partner, and my partner was trying to finish her PhD. Now, just to give you a little bit of quick background, I've been a touring spoken word artist for years, and I've been getting paid a pretty good amount. That was a significant part of my income. But the irony of it is, once I became a published poet, once you have a book, people don't want to pay you anymore to come out because they're like, oh, you want to come out to sell your book, so we're not going to pay you, right? I just knew this because I knew, this is again going back to knowing different parts of the business, is I knew that people would expect me to come for free, and there was no way I could afford to do that. Paying for daycare, paying for a babysitter if I'm gone from the house, and paying for travel and stuff myself. And Coffee House printed my book, and they're great, but they don't have money. I'm not like J.K. Rowling. They're not gonna, So I knew that if I wanted to get my book out there, I would need to find time to do it that worked with my work schedule, that worked with my partner's schedule, and I would have to find money somehow to do it. So I applied for a grant, and thankfully I got it. And I took my book on tour, but I did it, me and my partner sat down and said, you know, in terms of work, in terms of you getting your PhD and writing time in terms of all this, how can we make this work in the schedule, right? And we sat down and we nailed it out. But and that meant that I front-loaded my schedule, and I also took a break for the first time in 13 years of performing, so that my partner, you know, I toured for half the year, and then my partner, I stayed at home. I still worked, but my partner finished her PhD, you know. So it was totally a compromise. It was sitting down and thinking about all the challenges and figuring out, is it doable? What are the resources I need? What's the time I need? And like being very intentional and deliberate about all of it.
That's a lot of good input there.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's really good. And the practical stuff is just as important as the philosophy behind what drives you to do this. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. There are some, I hope. We'll get a mic to you, maybe. Yes.
I have a question. So, I have a degree in social work and a degree in fine art. I'm a puppeteer and I work as an artist organizer. So, my world is really jumbled sometimes, and it's hard to put that onto a resume. And it's hard to get it out there and frame it in a way that people understand those complexities. So, what are your suggestions for like framing those?
Puppeteer. Are you kidding? That's it. That's all you put. Done. Hired.
I mean, I guess a very pragmatic answer to that is, I mean, because similar situation in a lot of ways. I have 4 different resumes ready to go at any given time. They all pretty much say the same thing. I mean, they all get to the same destination. But you know, some emphasize the administrative work more. Some emphasize the exhibition history more. Some emphasize the publication history more. And maybe it's even just a matter of having, you know, the publication history higher up than the exhibition history on one, or leaving the exhibition history off of one just because it doesn't relate to anything. But because you're not probably ever going to have like one resume or one, I guess, artist statement or mission statement or whatever that's going to fit all of those things, even though they have a lot to do with each other. Just having a couple different ones, I mean, is a really, you know, for whatever opportunity comes up, you've got one that's pretty well suited for whatever the opportunity is.
Yeah, and on the other side of that, I've just recently been on hiring committees now that I'm in a leadership position at my organization. And before going through this, I mean, you know, as artists, we all on our resume want to represent our glorious multitudes of being. But the person reading your resume does not want to see that. You know what I mean? And so it's really about being strategic and having multiple ones, you know.
Well,
and I'm sorry, and the last thing I'll say is, or figure out a way to talk about how that's relevant to what you're applying for, you know.
I had a mentor look at my resume one year, and she just looked at me and she said, Semhar, there's what I call the 5-finger rule. And I was like, what, are you going to steal something? She goes, no. She said, no, I'm going to put my hand on the resume, and generally employers read what goes as far down as their thumb. And she said, so I'm not going to pay attention to page 2 or even 3. She goes, I'm going to look at page 1. And even though you have really impressive stuff, and even though all of this is so unique, I don't have time. She said, so write a summary paragraph at the top, change it for every employer, put your mission or your goal in that summary, because I don't have time, like Bao is saying, to figure out how this all comes together. I mean, I can already see what you do. I can see the linkages between that, but a lot of people won't give that time. So I just, because I feel like I'm giving them a mouthful of stuff. I always, you know, where do I start? Who am I? So know who you're talking to, know who you're submitting it to, and help them see what you see.
Also, I'm going to tell you to talk to Laura Holloway, who did a workshop on something connected to this earlier today, right? About how to talk about what you make and do. So that's another resource here in the room someplace. Other questions? Oh, there she is. There's Laura. Question here. Oh, there. Wherever.
We should take
Okay.
a couple, Susan. A couple.
Okay, so in terms of having a lot of ideas and wanting to pursue these, how do you know where to put them or what outlet would best suit them? Like studying at a university, starting a business, starting a nonprofit. How do you know where to put your ideas or to put your passions where they'll fit the best?
Dartboard. There's no answer to. You can't ask us. The answer is you can't ask us that question. That's illegal.
Well, I mean,
Can you explain why?
You're breaking the rules. I'm serious. You don't.
I'm honest, I'm
You
breaking the
cannot ask that question. Our answer is bullshit because it's. We're going to tell you what we think, but that's irrelevant. This is about you. You decide what the hell you want to do and go do it.
On the other hand, I appreciate the scorched earth approach because there's, that's the way the world works. But when I think back to the way that a lot of the things that I'm involved in fell into place, a lot of it, probably most of it actually, had a great deal to do with who I was associating with at that time, who I was hanging out with, what people I was working with and collaborating with were doing. And just having those models being very clear to me in terms of seeing what they looked like, having friends that were in graduate programs or having friends that were running small businesses or having friends that were maybe organizing a nonprofit. Maybe the direction that I went with things was not like the right one or the best one or the easiest one or the most sensible one, but it's the one that in some sense made the most sense to me because that's what I was experiencing. Those are the people that I respected, were doing for themselves, and I could see the way that they made it work, and it seemed easier to say, well, I know how this works. I know the way that this world seems to operate. This is what I'll try.
This is why I'm a firm believer in self-interrogation as soon as possible. Checking with yourself what your goals are in life, in work, in profession, and everything. And you do have to do that internal check of yourself. So I had to ask, all right, well, what do I want to change? What do I want to do? Oh, I want to change something. What do I want to change? And that kind of in conversation with yourself. And, I wanted to be at a certain place by a certain point, so there are goals, but you have to be flexible when they don't happen. And in terms of sequencing, I had a lot of mentors. I talked to a lot of people who were in law, in human rights, in governance, in government, in nonprofits, in education. I tried to absorb and understand the pros and cons to what I was considering. And again, this is really intentional. And to be honest, not doing that in my college years and grad school years and early 20s I'm really glad I did that. But I don't know if that's common, especially now, like with Twitter. I would never be able to sit still if I had Twitter when I was in school because I'm constantly looking outward. And so that inward reflection did a lot for me and learning from other people.
I agree with all that, with what everybody said, and I think part of why I would be reluctant to answer, kind of like Mike, is so I told you the Cub Food story. I didn't know much about the world, and then when I got to college on full scholarship, I knew I loved poetry, but back then my advisor, who I looked up to, said, if you want to be a poet for a living, you have to go get an MFA and then be a professor. That's the only way you can make it. And to her, that was the only way to make it back then, but that's not what I ended up doing. And I'm trying to say that there are different things you can try, but if you had asked me back then, I'm going to be the program director of a literary arts organization, you know what I mean, when I grow up, and that's how I'm going to support myself, I would not have seen that was possible, but I'm glad that it did. Does that kind of make sense? I mean, when I created my spoken word series 12 years ago, they promoted me from receptionist, and I said to them, they said, what do you want to do? What do you want to create? And I said, I want to create a spoken word series for artists of color and indigenous artists. And they said yes, but they could have said no, right? And we're still running many years later, but what would they have done if they had said no, right? I guess what I'm saying is, I have no idea how I'm here right now. I keep, you know what I mean? I really don't. I do feel like I've worked hard and I've had a lot of luck and a lot of flexibility, but it's always hard to answer that question because who knows?
But
you know?
tapping into what motivates you and what you're passionate about is key, and to constantly check that. I didn't know that I was going to talk about diaspora issues in my career, and that this is like the promotion of African diaspora and development and women's contributions in the diaspora to Africa's development. When 18, 25, 30, I didn't. The thing I've learned is the fluidity, the flexibility, and checking in with your gut about what's motivating you.
I'm just going to add something because I was being scorched earthy and glib. And, so there are techniques. And there are lots of techniques, and you can read about how to make decisions. There is a technique that I like, that I'm a huge fan of. You guys know Ghost Dog Way of the Samurai? Yeah, right? Come on. Awesome movie. Right? So there's a technique that we've developed called 7 breaths. And the notion is you got to do something, right? Standing still gets you nowhere. So in the space of 7 breaths, make a decision. Move in that direction. Now, every time you reach a decision, give yourself 7 breaths to make a decision. It doesn't matter if it's the right decision or the wrong decision, because you are always making decisions. You can make a U-turn. You can turn left. You can turn right. You can continue down a path. But the point is, unless you start moving, you end up nowhere. And what everyone's just said is, you don't start out knowing where you're going to end up. You start out, you pick a direction, you go, you meet an obstacle, you move, you jump, you go around it, whatever, and you end up in a completely different place, perhaps, or where you intended. But the point is, you got to start.
Wow, it's almost like I paid you guys to say that. I mean, this is what I was talking about this morning when I was talking about focusing on the why and being flexible on the how or the what, and it's the same thing. Another question? Okay.
Hello. I asked a couple people this question earlier today, but I want you guys to go back in your head a little bit. At the beginning of your entrepreneurial experience, what is some advice that you wish you known then that you know now?
I've gone first twice. I'm not going first again.
Not to undersell my time. I started gigging as a spoken word artist right when it started to happen for a bunch of us nationally, and a bunch of us were making it up as we go along. Like technical writers, contracts, how much we get paid per hour, all these things. We didn't know. We would ask each other, how much are you asking for? I don't know. Is this enough? Is this too much? And I always consistently undersold myself. Not because I wanted to be out there, but I was like, oh, I'm a community artist. I want to be accessible to everybody. And that's value to that. But there's also some bullshit, because you have to take care of yourself. You have to and I wish I had that conversation with myself, because maybe then I wouldn't have had an enormous amount of debt, for years that was a headache for me to take care of. And I guess don't undervalue your talent or your time.
Along with that, claim your space and claim it early. Especially as women and community change agents, we want to, I just want to help. I know so many people, some in this room, who will work midnight oil for a cause and then not get any compensation or credit. And the reason that's important is because I've had ideas copied and people profiting off of them. And then I go, I probably should have put my name on that. But claiming an idea, even if it's not unique, you are a part of that process and you are the generator of it. You need to take care of yourself. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, but that doesn't pay your bills or give you a sense of satisfaction in the same way of seeing something you started turn into a successful venture or project. I tell a lot of young women that have real passion to put it on paper and claim it early.
Excellent. Another question?
So you guys have talked about your multiple professions and things, but you also alluded to the other stuff. So let's talk about what makes the whole person. Michael, you and I are friends. I know you haven't touched on an nth of what else you do. And if you could expand upon that, because that makes your business world achievable.
I think he's calling
Thanks,
you
Bob.
Jeez.
out. Thanks, Bob.
What else do I do? that makes the whole. So the whole, right? You're asking about the whole, and I have this thing called WinterCAMP that I run that gets entrepreneurs and people like that to understand the balance between work, family, passion, et cetera, et cetera. I play a lot. So I decided to learn how to downhill ski. So I went and learned how to downhill ski. Now I'm a backcountry skier and I jump off things. It's fun. I just got back from India where I raced tuk-tuk, which is a little 3-year-old motor taxis, 3,500 kilometers from the border of Burma to the border of Pakistan. I learned how to sea kayak and went and paddled around Isle Royale. I learned how to mountain climb, rock climb, and I've summited a whole number of peaks. All of that is pursuit of passion and play, and I try to infuse that notion of play in my work. So whether it's trying to change policy in green building, or it's trying to teach other designers and architects that islands are a terrible concept in kitchen design. Any of these things, to me, I got an applause back there on that one. That was odd. And Bob, let me know if this is getting at what you were asking, but to me, it's looking for balance within all of those things, keeping it fun, keeping it playful, going out and doing stuff that excites you and challenging yourself every step of the way, and not necessarily letting any one thing define you and what you are. You know, I don't believe in fate. I don't believe in destiny. I'm very much a believer in that I do what I choose to do, and I'm going to make what I want to out of any given situation. And when someone says, well, I attended this thing, it was really boring, or that was really stupid, then I say, well, then you just wasted your time because you found nothing to take out of that situation. So, you know, you're the idiot, not the speaker, right? The speaker may have been an idiot, but I'm not. Am I
not
kind
today. None of these speakers today.
Bob wants me to say something I'm not saying. And how did we meet? How do we what? So yes, then there's the gift. Sorry, Rotary. And giving back to the community, and what we're doing right here, which is sharing what we know. And I think that being engaged with your community, give back, volunteering, building community. Community supports what you do. If the community is not vibrant, your business isn't vibrant. All of, don't get a big head, all of the stuff that we would say here. And that's, yeah.
I was going to say, even when I talk about mission-oriented work or whatever, you've still got to be grounded enough to know that you're not unique, but you also can't do this alone. And so what's kept me going is actually putting myself in a healthier environment, around support, family, friends, taking time out for myself, which is also really important. Play, centering. I don't meditate, but I feel like I need to. That kind of keeping things balanced, and just not. I had a really great friend call me one day, and he's like, "Semhar, there's this really great opportunity, and I want you to do it, and I want you to do it." I was like, "Oh, I'm not really qualified for that. That's kind of too big for me." He goes, "No, I'm calling you to offer you." No, I'm not sure I'm the one. And I was so focused on this other goal. He's like, "You know what, Semhar? Call me when you get over yourself. Call me." And I used to think getting over yourself meant you were arrogant, but sometimes you're in your own way. And the best thing I learned was to let go and let other people help. Put yourself in this space of service and community and family and balance.
All right. On that note, thank you so much. This has been really helpful. Thanks, all of you. We have a few minutes left to wrap this up, and you can definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then we'll be over there having happy hour, and everybody can talk to everybody, including these folks here. Thank you so much. I need Mally, wherever Malik is. Okay.
I was like, I have to get my
There's still time for you.
Yeah, sorry. It was an honor. It was great.
We also have a phone that was left in one of the workshops. I was just going to come ask you to make an announcement about it. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So, the last thing from today, those of you who've been here before will remember this, is we would just want to do a little exercise at the end to sort of recap, reflect on what you have done, what you've heard, what you've learned. So I think we have more people here than we usually do at the end of the day, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Let me grab this one.
Yes, we do. And this is a very beautiful thing. And I think that was something I brought up to someone I spoke with earlier, is even the room that we decided to have it at this year, I think was actually in now, and seeing this was, I think, a great choice to have it here, just based off size, look, the giant projector, and actually capturing a lot of this on cameras. It feels a lot more intimate, just as a point of my reflecting on the day from my standpoint.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for your input.
So I'm sorry. Okay, not like my shit matters. Rappers, let me shut the hell up.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what we'll do is we'll combine 2 tables together. So can you self-organize on that? 2 tables together. We're going to have people coming around with flip charts for each table and some markers. And what we'd like you to do in your groups is just think about 3 things.
Yeah, we can do 3 things.
3 things that stood out from you today. 3 things that you're going to take away with you out of this room as a group. Discuss that together, and then we'll hear from each group as we're finished with that. While you guys are working, we're going to get some more prizes going up here too.
Yes, and let's all collaborate. So chop chop, everybody.
Yeah, chop chop, wiki wiki.
We're just chilling here on the stage.
We're happy to have you chill on the stage. Actually, thank you so much. That was really great, you guys.